Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National MAPS Committee Pipeline webinar tonight. The title of the webinar tonight is Navigating Your Path to a Career in Healthcare, and the focus of this webinar is to learn about what makes a successful career in healthcare and biomedical sciences. We'll discuss the personal qualities and organizational support that can help you thrive in these fields. My name is Logan Dean, and I am the National Pre-Medical Board Member for this administrative year of the Student National Medical Association. And I will also be the moderator today, host today. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Bennett, who's our speaker today. I'm going to start with a brief introduction about Dr. Bennett, and then we will get started with our presentation for tonight. Thank you for being here. We are honored to have Dr. Bennett as our speaker for tonight. Dr. Bennett serves as the Michigan State University Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, where he reports directly to the President and is a member of the executive leadership team. In this role, he partners with other senior leaders, deans, faculty, staff, students, and alumni to advance the institution's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic priorities. Dr. Bennett is also a professor of medicine in the College of Human Medicine at MSU. Prior to joining MSU, Dr. Bennett served as inaugural Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and the Chief Diversity Officer at Northwestern University. Previously, he worked as Associate Dean for the Graduate School and Associate Dean for the Diversity in the Division of Biology and Medicine at Brown University. In addition, Dr. Bennett held administrative appointments at Brigham and Women's Hospital, Harvard Medical School, and United Way of Massachusetts Bay and Merrimack Valley. He also served on the faculty at Harvard, Brown, and Northwestern. Dr. Bennett received his BS in biology and minor in Spanish from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University and earned his PhD in biomedical sciences from Meharry Medical College. Dr. Bennett has completed his postdoctoral research training in the Department of Pathology at Harvard Medical School and is alumnus of the Harvard University Administrative Fellows Program and Massachusetts Education Policy Fellowship Program. Dr. Bennett is also a proud past professional board member of the Student National Medical Association and a lifetime member. We are so happy to have him tonight to not only represent MSU, but also the Student National Medical Association with his previous and current involvement with our organization. Thank you so much, Dr. Bennett, for being here.
Absolutely, Logan. Thank you so much for the introduction. Good.
All right, so I am going to remove myself and add the presentations on the screen. Thank you all for being here tonight again.
So good evening, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about pursuit of careers in healthcare, but also in the biomedical sciences. Today, what I'm going to do, and I'll show you an outline in just a second, I'm going to talk about factors that are going to help you to succeed in your career as you have determined what you want to do, whether it's becoming a physician, a scientist, or a physician scientist, or something totally different. But I'm also going to talk about the path toward those careers and thinking about who are the people along the pathway towards healthcare, towards working in academic medicine at a medical school within a university system, like I have done in the past, and understanding what the pathway is as far as those who may be traveling along it with you, but also what challenges may be in front of you and how you can work towards success. So the things I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about the diversity along the pathway, as I've mentioned, and I'll specifically share data today regarding to medicine and academic medicine. So I'll talk about faculty, I'll talk about leaders in that space. I do have, and there surely are additional data specifically for the biomedical sciences. For today, I felt it was too much to include those data, but every other part of the presentation I talk about will be relevant to everyone. I think it's really important for those of you who are considering medicine to also understand the impact of the 1910 Flexner Report, now some 114 years after its release. We'll talk about the broad benefits and challenges of advancing diversity, equity, inclusion in medicine, and then we'll talk about your role and our responsibility to patients. And this is the part around what can we do as individuals to best prepare for these careers and prepare for practice or research on the bench, and what can we do within our organizations where we work. Whether you own your own practice, you're in a group practice, you're working as a hospitalist if you are a physician, or you're working in a research facility that may be on the college campus or other setting. Much of what I share today will be applicable despite what your chosen path may be. So let's begin with talking about diversity along the pathway toward and within academic medicine. I'm going to begin talking about medical students, but as you all know, just as MAPS reaches back to undergraduate students, there are challenges, I would say, along this entire pathway, beginning with the K-12 secondary ed portion of the education and training on through undergrad education and undergraduate medical education and graduate medical education and so forth. But I wanted to give you an idea about sort of what the landscape currently looks like and what you might expect. So I wanted to give you an idea about the racial and ethnic groups in the national medical student body between the years 78 and 2019. And if you look at the bottom, if we just focus on sort of diversity as it relates to gender and looking at women and men, we can focus on just the start, that's top looks like a aqua or bluish, greenish, bluish colored line. And what that shows are women who are under 10% of the total enrollees. And then you'll see Black men, which are about 3% consistently of enrollees in medical school. When you look at the representation of racial and ethnic minorities in the national medical student body as compared to that in the United States, what you'll find at the top, if you look at Black women, you'll see that the representation of Black women relative to those in the States has kind of gone from 1980, it was quite low, to 2000 when we saw a wonderful increase in those who were pursuing these careers, and then sort of a slight dip back in 2019, if you're following those different colors. And if you look at men, what you'll see is that over time, you've had fewer Black men who are actually applying to med school as it relates to the US population. Again, looking at these X and Y axes. Again, want to show you the data so that you understand what's there. If you look at medical school applicants by race and ethnicity and look at Black and African American, what I want you to do is show you change over time. Between 2014 and 2021, there has been a 41.1% change, an increase in the numbers of students who are applying. When we look at the U.S. medical school matriculants across the same years, those who apply and actually are admitted and will begin medical school, along the same period of time from 2014 to 2021, you see increases, but those increases go down to 21% versus the 40 or so percent that we saw for applicants. So that gives you an idea about the sort of success rate for those who are applying versus those who are being admitted to some extent. When you look at comparison of socioeconomic composition of medical students based on households across the state, the nation, I apologize, I wanted to highlight those non-Hispanic Black households. And essentially what you'll see is that when you look at some of these, the bluish colored bars toward the bottom that go lighter as you get to the top, when you look at US Black medical students, you'll see a lot of those bars. And those darker colored bars represent the fifth quintile, fourth quintile, third quintile, and then that final grade, the second quintile of household income, meaning that the households that these students come from don't earn as much as some of the other racial and ethnic groups that you will see across the nation. So we're talking about some level of economic disadvantage that is considered here in this instance. When you look at the amount of pre-medical education debt for medical student matriculants by race and ethnicity, I just wanted to call out one example. And if you look along the X axis where you see at the end $50,000 or more, and you see that red line pointing at that purple bar there, that bar stands for Black and African American. So what we're saying is that Black and African American students, despite coming from some of the lowest quartiles as it relates to household income are also, as you might imagine, leaving medical school with $50,000 more of debt. So leading the way in debt as well. This information is not to be presented as daunting. It is to help you understand the circumstance of many students who are applying to and matriculating in medical school who identify as Black. And I think the more you know about what this process is like, understanding how you might approach it based on your own circumstances, you can plan better, but also ensure that you have access to or know how to access resources that can be helpful. I want to talk a bit about residents as well to give you an idea about sort of the data that are the best the data that are available to let us know who our trainees are across the nation. So we have about 50% of our medical residents identifying as white, nearly 22% as Asian American, nearly 8% as Hispanic, another 6% as Black or African American, and the numbers are even smaller for our American Indian and Alaska Native neighbors and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander friends. So to give you an idea about the residency population and that makeup, this is what those data do. I also wanted to show you again so that you can begin to think about and forecast what are the skills that I need? What are the relationships that I should build? What are the opportunities that I should take aware of in order to beat some of these odds? When you look at this table, what it shows are the rates and adjusted odds ratios of being unplaced in graduate medical education. What that means is that these are folks who are finishing up medical school, have already finished, taking their step one, step two exams, and are applying for residency. You'll see the block around Black or African American. And what I wanted to point out there for African American males represented in the green bar and African females, I apologize, in the gold bar, is that African American males and females have just about the highest rates and the highest probabilities of being unmatched. There are several factors that contribute to matching as you are applying for residency training post medical school. And a lot of that has to do with your performance, of course, as a medical student, shelf exams, your courses, how are you doing in those, your overall grades. But also, again, we talked about those step exams. So something to keep in mind as you strive to do the best you can and be the best you can in preparation for these careers and the training necessary to do them. I thought it'd be interesting to share a bit more data about racial representation across specialties by race and ethnicity group based on a specialty representation quotient. So what can I say about the representation quotient? It estimates the extent to which students from a racial or ethnic group are overrepresented or underrepresented in a given specialty. So it looks at overrepresentation and also underrepresentation. So if you look at the specialty representation quotient here, what you'll find is that in the top, Black applicants are underrepresented to some extent, and you can see up to the value, probably around 2.8 or so on this chart across every specialty. And if you look at underrepresented minority applicants total, so including Latino, Latinx, or Hispanic, including Asian American. In some ways, we do count Asian Americans being underrepresented. However, they are overrepresented numerically based on their percentage in the US population. So this is collectively. And when you look collectively, you see that we're just surpassing maybe 1.7, 1.8% collectively. So again, giving you an idea about opportunities there for you to strive, but knowing all the training and all the things that you can do to make sure you're putting yourself forward in the best way that you can to be competitive. So what about physicians who are working? This is really important. So for those of you who are thinking about medicine, this should resonate. For others who are thinking about other spaces, while I'm not sharing those data today, I can tell you I'm very familiar with the data regarding graduate students who are pursuing biomedical science doctorates, pursuing postdoctoral degrees, and then going into various jobs, whether it is higher ed, whether it's industry and government. But there is an underrepresentation of Black scientists, of Black physicians, Black practitioners, I will say, and other racial ethnic groups. What this shows you is the total projected physician shortfall estimated between 2018 and 2033. And what I want you to know is that that shortfall ranges anywhere between 54,000 physicians and 139,000 physicians. When you look at the projected physician demand growth by patient race and ethnicity, again, same time period, 2018 to 2023, what we know is that by 2023, we're going to need nearly 24,000 additional Black physicians who are non Hispanic to meet the growth of patient race by the year 2033. So there's a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot of opportunity here for those of you who are considering medicine now, but also I think about the current medical schools, whether they are predominantly white medical schools, predominantly Black, and you all may know that there are two additional predominantly Black medical schools that are being established across the country. There is a dire need. So I hope that if nothing else, you'll remember some of these data. And they're not to, again, frighten you, but they may be sobering, if anything, to maybe help you ensure and even dig deeper regarding that passion you have for becoming a physician and also engaging with the patient population of your choice. So I wanted to share with you the physician workforce data as of 2021 as reported, just so that you can take a look at all of the underrepresented and then white physicians here. And you'll see that as far as the physician workforce goes, despite the industry or sector that one may work in, there's a total of about 5.3% of physicians who are, again, who identify as Black. And if you want to know where Black physicians are predominantly located, it's Georgia and Maryland. We know that these are places where we can find a lot of Black people or African Americans living in general, but these also be places where these individuals have decided to call home and also to work professionally. So Georgia and Maryland is where you'll find the bulk. For faculty, and we'll get through the rest of these data, when you look at the percentage of full-time faculty who work in U.S. medical schools by race and ethnicity, and those who identify as Black, that number is 3.6%. These data are as of 2018. There are probably slightly new data available, but I know that this number has not moved significantly since 2018. So about 3.6% of full-time faculty in U.S. medical schools identify as Black. And when you look at the percentage of full-time U.S. medical school faculty who identify by race, sex, and ethnicity, you'll see that the bulk of faculty who are Black in medical schools are women. And that's at around it's over 50%, not quite 60. And then the remainder, this sort of green or teal portion, those are African American men. So more Black female faculty who are full-time at U.S. medical schools than men. And for those of you who are thinking about going into, again, academic medicine and understanding that's not the only route, but those are the data I'm choosing to share today, I wanted to give you an idea about representation by sex and race, ethnicity, and department. These data are small for you to see, but what I'll just call your attention to are solid red lines, which represent Black males, and the dotted red lines, which represent Black females. And without going through the mechanics of what this table is attempting to share, if you look at an S score, which quantifies the degree of underrepresentation, what that means is that the higher the S score, the greater the representation. So as you look at those red lines, the dotted red for Black females and the solid red for Black men, the higher these lines are, the greater the underrepresentation. So I look at the top two here, the red lines are trying to win the race. And in this instant, that's not a good thing. That means that Black people are more underrepresented in those areas. I put these up here because you may identify the specialty of your choice to understand how underrepresented these areas may be as it relates to Black physicians. But again, something just to be aware of. And as these data were published in 2018, there may be some slightly new data, but people aren't necessarily asking the same questions when they're doing these publications. What I want to say too, and I think it's important that you see and know these data, which is why I shared them, is that today in 2024, you have many more faculty across the nation, many more residents, clinical fellows, many more graduate students, postdocs, and medical students and undergrads actually doing research, conducting research, and generating data that are published and disseminated to help prove that this is beyond anecdote. The experience of us not seeing anyone who shares our background, who has shared our experience, who looks like us, that's real and that is pervasive across much of academia in whatever field you choose to go into, and truly whatever profession, if you're thinking about STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, or medicine. So again, these data are important to know for you to share with your classmates, your faculty, and others who may be interested. When I look at the proportion of Black and African American faculty physicians at medical schools, this gives you a different kind of a picture than what I showed before, but it also gives you an idea about the rank of faculty. So when we think about rank in the academic system, of course, a full professor or professor is the most senior, followed by associate professor, followed by assistant professor. And in some medical schools, for those of you who are considering careers in medicine, there is an instructor level, which is below assistant. And we often find in some medical schools, as you might imagine, women and people of color, that would include Black people, often in that instructor category. It can be because they didn't know to ask or negotiate for a higher level ranking at assistant. Um, or it could be that their desire is to have an appointment, but to focus more clinically or on research. So it maybe doesn't matter. But I'll just say to you all that starting at the assistant professor level puts you on a more level playing field to begin. I would say with many of your peers, whether you come in with publications or not from research, or if you come in with various types of experience, I'd just say pay attention to those rankings. And the takeaway here is that the higher the rank, professor on down, the lower the representation of people of color or Black people. So you'll see fewer professors than you'll see associate professors. You'll see fewer associate professors than assistant professors, and so on. And then lastly, I think these are the last data I have to share today. I wanted you to be aware of what leadership looks like within our medical school faculties and departments, because that matters too. So we talked about the underrepresentation of faculty across medical schools, but also when you look at women who are chairs in medical schools, you'll see the red box on the far left. You'll see the dark is full-time, the next color, like turquoise green, is full professor, and then you'll see the lightest is department chair. All of these numbers are well below 10%. Some of them are below 5%. And for Black men, the numbers are even lower. It looks like we haven't gotten above 2% or so as relates to full-time faculty, full professors, or department chairs who identify as Black. So lots of opportunity here for those of you who are interested in academic medicine to continue your work and training, because you'll have an opportunity in a medical school to influence future medical students, to inspire them, to instruct them, to help show them the path toward a career in this space. And you'll also have an opportunity to conduct research where you can bring on undergraduate students in the summer and throughout the academic year. So it's a wonderful opportunity to pay it forward, it being the access that you've been given, the instruction that you have followed, as well as the success that I believe you'll have too. So just something to keep in mind. I want to talk about the Flexner Report, and some of you may be aware, but I don't think everyone is. And I think working in this space and being interested in medicine, but also talking to those and helping to recruit those who come behind, I think it's important to note. So what is the Flexner Report? It was a report published in 1910 that truly did lead to medical education in the US being modified in many ways for the better, but there were some adverse outcomes. The report was authored by Abraham Flexner, who was not a physician, but a former school teacher who was charged by the Carnegie Foundation to go around to medical schools in the US and Canada at the time, and using Johns Hopkins as a standard bearer to compare these US and Canadian medical schools to the work that was going on at Hopkins. And what the Carnegie Foundation gave Flexner the free license to do is to go to all these medical schools and to mark some as with an A for being compared favorably to Johns Hopkins, to mark those with a B if they were considered substandard but could be salvaged by supplying financial assistance, and C, those that were of such poor quality that they should be closed. And what happened as a result of Flexner's review, a third of the medical schools in the nation at that time of his review were actually closed. So at the time of Flexner's report back in 1910, Black people were 10.6% of the US population. American Indians and Asian Americans together totaled less than 1%. In 1900, you can see the life expectancy for white males was around 48 years and for white females around 51. At the same time, the average life expectancy for Black males was 32.5 years and for Black females, 35 years. Such things as you might imagine back in the early 1900s related to segregation, discrimination, poverty. We talked about the inadequate facilities, poor housing, malnutrition, all were doing a disservice to Black communities. There were high rates of mortality from infectious disease like typhoid fever and tuberculosis or TB. And again, in the education system, as segregation was the law at the time, there were resources that were directed towards certain schools more so than others, as you might imagine. So, what's happened in the last 100 years? There have been lots of developments in the biomedical sciences, positive developments that have resulted in many advances in medical technology. There have been advances in public health and health care. Average life expectancy has extended more than 30 years for most groups, and chronic disease rather than infectious diseases are now the leading causes of death, minus COVID. We'll have to count for COVID. However, disparities in life expectancy in health status and in access to healthcare for ethnic and racial minorities have persisted since 1910 and in some cases widened. They've even gotten worse. So what Flexner's report did, it led to a drastic reduction, unfortunately, of the number of predominantly Black medical schools, and we'll talk about that for a few minutes. As I said, he was given the license to go in and say, oh, this place is good, this place is not so good, this place is bad, based on I would say his review. And remember, Flexner was not a physician. So I just want to point that out again. The second thing, one of the major outcomes of Flexner's work was that it directed the development of admission standards to medical school that rendered medical education beyond reach for most Blacks for decades. And what this really speaks to are the types of questions that are being asked on entrance exams when Black students who may be coming from historically Black college or universities may not have the same access to information, to material, to content that is needed in order to take and successfully pass the exam. And also there is a cost associated with these exams that again were out of limit for some folks. And the other thing that the Flexner report did, it articulated a truly limited vision of the role of Black physicians in America, thus marginalizing Black schools and their graduates. So Flexner didn't believe that Black physicians had the ability to specialize, to truly engage in high-level thinking, to be, for example, neurosurgeons and those specialties that require us to, again, do some really some really deep, critical, intellectually, I would say, rigorous thinking. So that has lingered for a while as well. One, to give you an idea about the medical schools that were evaluated by Flexner between 1908 and 1910. So in 2 years, he went to Howard University, and he also went to these schools I'm going to call out that are no longer in existence. Knoxville Medical College, Leonard Medical School of Shaw University, Louisville National Medical College, New Orleans University Medical College, University of West Tennessee College of Physicians and Surgeons. And when you look to the far right, you'll see the number of graduates that these places were producing. And I think about the Leonard Medical School at Shaw, they have produced over 400 graduates between 1882 and 1918, but they were shut down. The only two medical schools you'll note on this list that are still in operation are Howard University, that's been open since 1868, and my alma mater, Meharry Medical College, which opened in 1876. I want to mention African Americans who are enrolled students and graduates of currently open historically Black medical colleges, and you know that there are currently four. In addition to Howard and Meharry, we have Charles Drew out in California, and we also have Morehouse in Atlanta. So you'll see these two schools who have really helped to add to the production of graduates over the years, but just think where we would be had those other schools not been closed. And as I mentioned previously, there are two more medical schools coming on board across the country. So when we look at the projected estimates of additional graduates from closed medical schools that would have been open, if you look at the projected graduates across all five schools, the numbers in a steady expansion model, we would have been at around 27,800. And in a rapid expansion model, as of 2019, we would have been at 35,000 graduates, over 35,000. But again, three of those schools were closed. And it appears that the Leonard Medical School that was part of Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the University of Tennessee Medical School alone are projected to have produced 10 to 13,000 medical students by 2019 had they remained open. So let's talk about the benefits and challenges of advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and these will apply to you all as well. I think these five are quite evident as it relates to why I do this work, why you are participating in MAPS, and why you are also considering your own path forward. Your path toward a career in medicine, toward public health practice, toward research, biomedical research, whatever you choose to do. What I understand and what you know, and what I hope your institutions understand, that diversity promotes excellence, creativity, innovation, and that my institution and other places I've worked, I've said that we cannot be excellent without diversity. Diversity that is represented demographically by who we are, the identities we possess and their intersections, but also diversity of thought, diversity of training. Where are we recruiting people from? Who's helping us solve some of the most diverse and complex issues and challenges of the day? And that's what diverse teams do. Diversity also influences our approach to and scope of inquiry. There are certain lived experiences that we each have that would cause us to ask questions or reflect on experiences that we've had to determine if I were in medicine or if I were in biomedical research or public health practice, what could I do now, or what could I have done differently than knowing what I know? So you ask more questions, you ask more nuanced questions, and you solve more problems with diverse teams. Diversity also considers the evolving demographics in the United States and those who are going to college and interested in careers in medicine and research. It also improves the quality and efficacy of our educational efforts, of our clinical and community health outcomes. I believe that as well. And overall, diversity nurtures inclusive excellence. You've heard people use the term before, but it just means being intentional around the work we're doing to diversify, to ensure equity or fairness, and also to just promote inclusion and bringing people together and being fair. There are a few challenges in different areas that we face that I won't spend a lot of time on, but I want to mention to you. There are departments at the local level within leadership, but also personally with us as it relates to advancing diversity, equity, inclusion. It's often hard at the local level for any leader, and even I would say for MAPS chapter leaders. It's hard to concisely sometimes articulate and communicate a clear commitment or clear message that includes multiple components. And I say multiple related to diversity, equity, inclusion, because we know they are three different things, but they work well together. They work very well together. It also can be challenging to develop a single diversity, equity, inclusion strategy and action plan that's going to, again, hit every target that you maybe have set for yourself, but it is not impossible. It may also be a challenge to effectively implement, monitor, and assess programs based on a strategic plan, especially when you're working with multiple audiences. These are things I forecast for you as you think about the work that you want to do, the training you want to obtain, and who you want to be. How do you want to contribute? Do you want to be an administrator? Do you aspire to work in a system, in an organization, in a university, institution, or a hospital where you can truly affect change? If so, these are the things I'm telling you to be on the lookout as you move forward. As a senior administrator, which I am at my institution, it can be challenging for me and others to consistently communicate the values around this work in the same way. because we all have different understandings, I would say, and different lived experiences for sure. We often are resistant to change because change is unknown, and change can breed fear, it can breed anxiety as well. And policy implementation can sometimes be a challenge, but I will say it's the way to go. If you want to do something different, do something new, and you want to keep it in place, the best way to do that is to figure out a way to create a policy or some practice around it that can be recorded and concretized so that when you are no longer there in that place, in the space, that someone can go back to that record, to that handbook, to that policy manual, and carry out that action, whether it's related to diversity recruitment, equitable support for students and trainees, scholarships based on need, you name it. That's what policies do. And then organizational climate and change management happens whenever you're doing something very different and introducing it to an organization. And I just want us to be mindful of the things we should be aware of there. And finally, we all have our biases. There are things we don't know. We sometimes can get people to see what we see to help us in ways that are constructive, and that's often because they fear the consequences of participating for themselves, not knowing what may happen in retribution. But also, we who do this work, we fear consequences sometimes in moving things forward. So bias is important. And as I think about the work that I do, and as you think about your own path forward for those who may be engaging with you in ways that are unfair, that you know are just unjust, you hopefully can be in a place where you can call these out yourself, or you can report them to people who can be supportive of you. But bias, as we know, is a tendency to believe that some people, ideas, or et cetera, are better than others, and that usually results in some people being treated fairly. I put a link to a test here for those of you if you're interested in exploring your own biases, because we all have them. I have them. Some I am aware of, some I am not so aware of. But what Project Implicit allows you to do, which is a free resource made available by Harvard University and the Implicit Association Test, is to test your own biases. So go to that link, implicitharvard.edu/implicit, and take one of those tests. For the scientists in this space, now that we've gotten beyond the data, I want to share a few things before we get into what can you do to help support yourself and what can organizations do to help support your success. These are recent headlines about what people are saying about us and about you. They're talking about exploring identity safety cues and allyship among Black women students in STEM environments, because this is an issue. We're talking about how gender and race stereotypes impact the advancement of scholars in STEM, and how professors who even teach in STEM are receiving biased evaluations from undergrad or graduate students based on sex or gender identity or based on race. There are intersectional inequalities in science as we think about who conducts it, who's part of our trials, who are we doing research with and on behalf of. There are committees with implicit biases that promote fewer women when they do not believe gender bias exists. These data that I'm sharing with you, again, are for your edification, your enlightenment. But they are also potentially to be shared with those who you are studying with, your peers, those faculty and administrators who you're working with, to call out these instances in hopes that they can provide some level of support or anticipate challenges when they may come. More headlines: making gender diversity work for scientific discovery and innovation. We're still fighting for that. Gender diverse teams produce more novel and higher impact scientific ideas. These are data that we have to continue to share and stories we have to tell in order to get folks in the biomedical space, but also medicine, to truly embrace this idea around, again, diversity in medicine and what can we do. More headlines: increasing gender diversity in the STEM research workforce. Policies must address harassment and bias. I think they looked at my slides, these folks, but it goes there again to underscore policy. Disparities in gender and race among physician scientists, a call to action and strategic recommendations. And I think I'm getting to the end because again, none of this is to frighten you, but it really is to help you walk in with your eyes wide open. Rank and tenure amongst faculty at academic medical centers, a study of more than 50 years of gender disparities. Perceptual facilitators for the barriers to career progression, a qualitative study with female early stage investigators in health science. And finally, a mixed methods analysis of gender and career status differences in the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on underrepresented postdoctoral fellows and early career faculty. If anything, you should be heartened by the fact that these data exist as well because people are paying attention. These data have not always been available because people have not always asked these questions. And journals like Academic Medicine, the Journal of the American Medical Association, the New England Journal of Medicine, have not always published these reports. But this I see as a step in a very positive direction. Other headlines around misconceiving merit. Authors discuss their new book on the way science discriminates against those who are not white or Asian heterosexual men. Another article in Science, senior US lawmaker wants national academies to scrutinize racism in science. So these things are real, and I just want to be sure that you are clear eyed. NIH peer review criterion scores completely account for racial disparities in overall impact scores. What do we mean? The people who are serving on NIH peer review panels are exhibiting some level of bias as relates to scoring applications. NIH launches grant program aimed at closing the funding gap rate between Black and white investigators because Francis Collins, the former director of the NIH, recognized that there is a gap in funding between Black investigators and white investigators, and what are the things that need to be done to look at this besides review panels, but thinking about a program that can help address those atrocities. I just showed you this statement that I won't read, but just know that Francis Collins, a very serious, well-regarded scientist who directed the NIH up until, I think, recently, put out a statement about structural racism, called it out, and said that he and the NIH are sorry and committed to instituting ways of supporting DEI and identifying and dismantle policies and practices at their own agency that may harm the workforce and the United States science. This lets you know what that initiative is about. You can read it on your own, but I just want to applaud the NIH for taking that step. There are challenges that we face along the way, and it may seem like I'm talking about a lot of challenges, and I am, but I'm also going to talk about things that are going to help support you and your success as we move along. There were some students from the SNMA many years ago who conducted a survey of medical students across the nation. You can see some of the places where students resided. They were in larger cities, urban centers, it appears, mostly Black. And they were asked questions about what are the factors that help support their success or to inhibit it. And students define success in 7 domains: financial, professional, academic, happiness, identity, self-determination, balance, and service. These are the things that matter to students when they are in medical school. So financial could be through loans, they could be through other stipend-related support, professional, academic, I would say career and professional development, being happy, my identity as a Black person, being self-determined, my faith, understanding how to prioritize my priorities, balance, but also being engaged in service, being engaged in MAPS, being engaged in SNMA, being engaged in various programs have helped me to be grounded and rooted while I'm doing this work. Inhibitors of success that medical students cited: lack of support, being discriminated against, cultural representation, being the only person in their medical school class, in their rotation, and having to speak out or speak up on behalf of the entire race. Testing, challenges with testing, self-limitation, doubting ourselves. So thinking about mental health, but also resilience, mental resilience, and then financial, of course, as I mentioned before. And what helps to facilitate success? We talked about it before. Supports at various time, professional exposure, maybe this conversation, maybe going to AMEC here in April, and personal characteristics. I'm strong. I'm a person of faith. I think optimistically. Those are the types of things that matter to folks. For residents, they have faced similar challenges, and these data have become available in recent years. Without going through them all, I want to highlight a few just to let you know that residents as well face challenges. And guess what? So do faculty, and so do those who work in administration as well. In this same report about residents, I'll read 2 of these that just demonstrate the daily barrage of microaggressions and bias that they experience. And one example around assumption of lower status. These are quotes from residents of color. And what they said was, and what this particular person said here is, oh, yeah, I mean, the one that happens the most frequently is patients thinking that I'm like transport, not recognizing that I'm their physician surgeon that's going to be operating on them, and just seeing that thought process go through their head. Or having patients that are like, oh, you don't really look like a doctor. And here's one I would say for I'll go to the bottom and do one around the pressure to assimilate. And what it says is, yeah, you just told someone who's had an afro for the last 2 years, who finally got their hair flat ironed once, that you're like, oh, your hair looks so professional. So these are the things that can happen in spaces where we find ourselves being one of a few in at any one time. And again, these are not things to deter you, but things just to be aware of. For faculty, similarly, there's research and data out there about those who go into academic medicine. This looks at faculty who are at different stages of their career. 55% were men. There's quite a bit of racial ethnic diversity in this study as well. And what we wanted to know was what has helped you succeed and what have your challenges been? Faculty cited challenges that include not being able to communicate most effectively across culture, potentially with colleagues, and potentially with patients. Who knows? Isolation, feeling like I'm the only one, feeling invisible when I am the only one. People don't see me. They disregard me. Not having enough mentors, role models, or feeling like they have enough social capital in the space to expend, to get things done, to leverage for their benefit. And then the experience of being disrespected, subject to prejudice, but also subject to bias and racism. Other factors that underrepresented minority faculty have cited regarding their sort of time serving on the faculty are having their professional interest devalued. This probably happened, for example, early on as we had physicians and scientists wanting to delve into, I'll just say, health disparities research, acknowledging social determinants of health. We know the things that we have experienced and people in our communities. And the field, of course, has developed in a way that it is highly regarded in the way that we think about and talk about social determinants now. But that maybe hasn't always been the case for some faculty who were in the very beginning trying to bring more attention to these issues. And a couple others we talked about for students and trainees, representing your race, feeling like leaders should be more responsible for the challenges that are occurring, and then thinking about financial hardship that you still have as a faculty member, loans from medical school, loans from undergrad. These are things that we're still trying to pay off, and the slowness of change. I'm going to wind down here in the next few minutes, but these studies go on to talk about employee health and wellness outcomes with discrimination in the workplace. But because I'm not just talking about discrimination, I want to talk about what you can do and what organizations can do to ensure your success. So, what can you first do? We talked about bias. We talked about how to understand your own. For those people who you're interacting with, whether they're patients who come into your clinic, whether they are students who are coming to work with you, and maybe students who participate in MAP, understand where people are when they before and when they arrive to you. There's so much happening around the nation and the world now that it is impacting our well-being in different ways. It impacts how we show up in the classroom, again, how we might engage in the clinics, and how we even are engaging in public. We have to acknowledge the racial justice and violence is happening across the nation and the world. We have to acknowledge that coronavirus is still here. We have to acknowledge inflation and economic recession that occurs. We have to think about the divisive political landscape that has been, for many of you, part of your entire lifetime, especially over the past decade or so, and now approaching November 24 with national presidential elections and many other national and local elections, being aware. I also want all of us to be aware of, as future physicians and scientists, how to be vigilant around the ongoing challenges that members of underrepresented groups face. I talked about all those things up top just now. You can see those 4 bullets. But I have to mention also being aware of violence against women and sexual misconduct in the workplace, in the classroom environment, violence against sexual and gender minorities, broad issues of access and support for people with disabilities, broad issues of access to and the delivery of mental health services, thinking about discrimination against non Christian faith groups. On my campus, this is an issue as we are currently dealing with support for students and employees on both sides of the Israel Hamas conflict and war. How do we think about providing the various supports and education around the conflict, this deeply historical political challenge? Support for international trainees, but also non clinical folks for those of you who are in that space. We have to be culturally sensitive and embrace cultural sensitivity to provide high quality, effective health care to patients from diverse sociocultural backgrounds. We also have to understand why this is important because if we don't understand our patients and they don't feel like they can understand or trust us, there is poor adherence to treatment plans, leading to poor health outcomes and overall dissatisfaction. And again, the cultural sensitivity or empathy that you can demonstrate goes a long way to remove barriers that exist just because you are a provider and or a scientist and they are a patient or a member of the public trying to understand the information that you are sharing. Commit to cultural humility. This is something I hope we'll all do. It requires us to continually engage as lifelong learners, wanting to understand and ask questions opposed to making assumptions about people we work with, people who we treat, people who may be involved in our community-based participatory research studies or our biomedical research related or translational research related clinical studies. We need to be kind to people. Understand intersectionality and why it's important because none of us are one thing. And I would say each dimension of our identity impacts us in different ways. It impacts the ways that we access care, that we think about care, that we think about research, that we think about medication and trust for scientists and physicians. So acknowledge the intersectionality of every person every time you meet them. And especially when you're giving care, it's keenly important to notice it then. So, what can organizations do? All these things. Make sure that you have a mentor. Offer personal and professional career development opportunities, which today is an example of that. Learn about the power of negotiation. And I would say throughout your training, your education, as many negotiation, webinars, workshops, and things that you can get into, I encourage you to because it is an art. And negotiation will benefit you throughout the rest of your life, both professionally and personally. For those of you who are, again, thinking about progression along any pathway, organizations should be providing guidance on how you get there. They should be also be thinking about climate issues that will either help support you or detract from your focus. And another important thing that we are talking more about organizationally, and I'm very happy and heartened about that, is we're identifying more psychological and social factors that can mitigate individual and organizational barriers. So we're talking more to people. We're talking more to groups, identity-based groups, affinity-based groups, wondering what are the things that will help you succeed in this space? What are the things that we can do differently? And for all of us, no matter what the career is or whether we're going in science, a sense of belonging in spaces and a sense of social identity in those areas is keenly important. We get that through spending time, relationship, and having mentors and people who will talk to us and work with us. I'm gonna stop and ask if there are a few questions. As I know we started a few minutes late, but we should have a few minutes left. The rest of this are things that organizations can do, talking to people, which I just mentioned to you, investing. And here's a final resource for you if you're interested. We are talking again much more today, and we have been for the past decade about the experience of underrepresented students, trainees, and professionals. And it's only as we talk about these issues and acknowledge them that people are asking questions and actually conducting research. Agencies are providing funding to do this work. Publications are accepting these manuscripts to be published and disseminated across the world. So we are in a day and time where, despite many of the challenges that we face, there are efforts to share information, but equally, as you know, there are efforts to put disinformation out there as well. With that, I'm going to stop and ask if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bennett. There is a question that just popped into our comments that I can put onto the screen. Here we go. All right. So the question says, and it's from Facebook, of the data you've seen, are there any stats for the number of Black medical students who had mentors throughout their schooling, specifically if those mentors were also physicians?
Good question. Those are data I'm unaware of. But I believe that students who have had mentoring, students who participated in the old like SMDEP program, there are data that show rather, and I don't have these specific data, that participation in programs like that, of course, active, consistent mentoring do help to support success overall. But yeah, those data I don't specifically have. I do give another talk about mentoring though, so maybe one day I could do that.
Yes, for sure. I don't see any other questions in the chat at the moment. But you guys, please, our audience that's watching, drop them in the comment section. And I will present them on the screen. We have a comment here, not a question. Um, they just wanted to add that I think it was the Flexner report, but it stresses that minority medical schools and medical education for minorities was to be focused on primary care.
Exactly, that is exactly right. So I spoke to the fact that Flexner, the way that he approached this report and it was published, did believe that Black people didn't have the ability to specialize and that they could work in primary care, but again, just didn't have the mental capacity to do sort of more complex related procedures, such as a surgeon might. That is very true. And that is, again, the sort of hidden history in the wide open, meaning this document, its implications, and the many conversations and beliefs that folks at predominantly white medical schools have had for decades regarding the ability still. That has changed a lot, but I believe that it has been pervasive for quite some time and harmful, surely harmful.
I have a question that kind of connects with that question from our audience, or statement, excuse me, from our audience. And in your opinion, what do you think the importance is of the addition of new medical schools, specifically at HBCUs, like the announcement of the proposed medical schools at Xavier University of Louisiana and Morgan State University?
I appreciate that question. I think those schools are going to make a phenomenal difference in not only training a higher number or volume of medical students to add to the total, but also I'm thinking about the quality of education as well. Um, these new medical schools will have new facilities. Not to say that our current existing four, uh, historically Black medical schools don't, but these are going to be state-of-the-art facilities. They're going to attract undergraduate students to those institutions who want to matriculate in those programs, and I think you're going to see more people interested in medicine who maybe weren't even from those local areas, from New Orleans, from Louisiana, from Baltimore, from the Maryland, the DMV. And as we know, there are so many Black physicians and folks concentrated there anyway, as the data shared that I shared pointed out. So I think it's very positive. It's a very positive move that those medical schools are coming on board, and I'm excited about what they'll do. I really am. I really am. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for that feedback. And I also excited being a pre-medical student. So if y'all are watching, no, I'm kidding.
They might be.
Right. And I know we're over the 8 o'clock mark. So I would like to ask to be respectful of your time. Are you okay with taking a few more questions?
Sure. Yeah, if there are any. Absolutely.
I have a few more. My next question is: how can students advocate for themselves amidst the breakdown of the DEI initiatives at different institutions? And are there other offices that you're aware of that students can seek support that the DEI offices at their institution may have previously provided?
That's a great question, and the question speaks to what I assume those of you who are watching know is that there is, of course, a broad attack on DEI. And what I'll say, just for those who are interested, the Chronicle of Higher Education has done a really good job of tracking legislation in states across the country, and they provide a map, like a virtual map you can click on to see where the 81 or so bills that have been introduced across the nation that limit DEI or defund DEI, restrict DEI in some way, where they have been placed. You can also see how many of those 81 or so bills have passed, some that have become law, and some that have not passed or been considered yet. So it is troubling. I think you have to be really careful if you're in one of those states because from what I'm reading and understanding, that faculty can be reprimanded for either teaching potential topics or talking about certain things that are considered DEI related, but understanding that folks are misunderstanding DEI and mischaracterizing it. But for the sake of this conversation, I just wanted to share that is why some people are being admonished. Um, I would say if you have students and if it's peers who are interested, um, providing support for one another is really important. But then thinking about your national organizations such as the SNMA, thinking about the FLP. I love the Future Leaders Program, by the way. I have participated as a speaker since the beginning, and we've got to be going on 10 years now. But I love that program. Think about ways that you could get plugged into like minded people who maybe aren't affiliated with a particular organization or in a state where there are these restrictions. You have people like me. I am a former professional board member of the SNMA, but I am very accessible. People reach out to me on LinkedIn all the time. I think somebody might have found me on LinkedIn here. I don't know, but I would say leverage your network. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to say hello. Don't be afraid to send an email. So I say a good place to start is going to be leaning on SNMA. There is a network of SNMA members who have gone on to become physicians, deans, faculty, private practice, scientists who own, biotech company, you name it. So tap into your network, and I'm a part of that too.
Thank you for your feedback on that. And I can only, piggyback and say that please, yes, use us. We are a resource. We are a large resource. We're a national and international resource because we have chapters at the Caribbean medical schools. So please, we are here to help you as much as we possibly can. And for the last question, because I'm not seeing, make sure I'm not overlooking anybody. I'm not seeing questions in the, oh wait, I take that back. We have one on Instagram, and it says, "What is the time frame for returning to school after a break in medical school?"
The time frame for returning to school
After a break in medical school.
after a break in medical school. Well,
Um.
I'm
Okay.
not sure what the question is, but let me say this. I'll say before mid and something after mid. For those of you who are taking gap years, fine. Just figure out what you're going to do during that time. That's all. That's what I always say, having served on admissions committees for medical schools and in graduate school. For medical school in particular, if you're going to take time, utilize it doing something, if you can, human service related. Some people get CNS certification. You may get EMT certification. You may work as a medical scribe. Whatever it is, help it be relevant. It's going to be challenging, I think, not impossible though, for a medical student to finish medical school and maybe not enter the match right away, like that first year out. And I'm not sure if that's what this person is asking about, but I will say it can put you at disadvantage if you aren't going into the match when you graduate at the time, because every year there are very highly competitive applicants applying to match somewhere, and you just have to think about how you're putting yourself up against a pool of folks who maybe, I don't know, maybe they have had some experience that is cutting edge or novel that you didn't have access to when you were a student. But I just think if you have the ability, if your life circumstances allow you to, if you're in the mental space, because I am about taking breaks, especially if it's a mental break. But if you're in the space to push forward directly after med school, I would encourage you to consider that.
And he did provide a clarification question, and he was referring to how many years can lapse. I think he means, yeah. So that last part that of your
Sure.
feedback you just
Yeah,
gave.
I would say that several years can. So let me just share this for him. I won't tell the full story, but I will say I met a young lady in high school who was doing a summer research program when I was a employee at Harvard Med School many years ago. She went on to finish to go to college. The grades weren't great, not good at all, but she wanted to be a physician. So she went on and did, I think, a post-bac program, and then she took a couple jobs, and then she studied for the MCAT, took it 2 or 3 times. She got into med school. She got into med school. Life happened. She had a kid. Her family supported her. She kept going. She took her exams, her step exams. She did pretty good, and she matched in a residency in a rural area. And she is a practicing physician. She is what I would say is a non-traditional student, one who took breaks, because by the time she finished med school and residency, she was probably at least mm, 30, early 30s or so, but she persevered. So that's just the story of success and perseverance. Take the breaks you need to take. Understand it may be more challenging to return back into the space post graduating from medical school and going into residency, but it is not impossible. It is not impossible.
I have a question kind of similar, or at least talking about the perseverance that one needs to get through this medical and medical school journey. And I am wondering, what are the best ways for pre medical and medical students with an interest in academic medicine to position themselves for successfully achieving professorship
Hmm.
at one of the levels that you mentioned earlier? I know you said like as you increase in the professorship level, it decreases with diversity
Representation. Hmm.
represented. Yeah, and
Yeah.
how can those students use the data that is available to further like situate themselves in academic medicine?
Great. That's a great question. So, I would say if you're interested in academic medicine, think about getting some experiences in this space. So, if you are an undergrad student, continue to do research, undergraduate research at your home institution. Use those summers between. Sometimes, you'll get students to get opportunities to do research between their first year and sophomore year, but truly use your sophomore and junior summers to think about getting some research experience in and even go away, and if you can do research as a undergrad throughout the year, that'll be great too. So training is important, and training in different places is good too.
Mhm.
And when you train in different places, you learn different approaches. You're exposed to different people, but you also are expanding your network. And if you're applying to summer programs at institutions or that have medical schools, or applying for programs where you be based in a medical school, let that be a medical school where you might want to go one day,
Mhm.
because you're going to meet faculty, you're going to meet current students potentially, you're going to learn more about the culture and find out if that's a place that could be right for you. Meaning, does it feel right? Does it feel good? Does it feel nurturing? Is it welcoming? So I would say you just have to be intentional. The other thing is, when you think about the life of an academic in academic medicine, most likely it involves, if you're a physician, maybe some practice, some service, maybe some teaching as well, research, training students. So if you can conduct research that and stick with it, that leads toward a publication or two or so, that helps. That starts that track record of knowing how to write, knowing how to ask questions, and to produce a manuscript. But also, if you can be a part of some small proposals, grant proposals, to support your own work or written into others as a collaborator, what it does at an early age, it doesn't necessarily start your funding record, but it starts your ability to understand what the funding culture is. And it's a reference that you can make back to achieving or receiving that first grant or some of those smaller amounts. So stay connected to people who work in academia, get some research and training experiences in various academic institutions. There are training programs for junior faculty or new faculty who are pursuing these opportunities. And also think about the type of residency you might pursue, or clinical fellowship. And for those of you who are, yeah, I would say in graduate school too, pursuing a PhD, considering what opportunities they are to do other things or pursue masters, for example, in other areas. So, for example, if you're in a med school or residency program, you can get a master's in public administration. People often get an MPA or an MPH, a master's in public health. Those can, you'll learn skills, and you'll learn sort of the structure of things and how to operate in spaces that can benefit you in your career post medical school, post undergrad, and so forth. So just stay in the academy, stay connected to the academy, stay connected to people who you have seen thrive and who have obtained those levels at the professor rank or administratively that you want to pursue.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask the audience if you have a question, so please put it in the comments. And if I don't see one at the end of my last question, then I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you guys for your patience with us. All right, so Dr. Bennett, our last question, unless somebody pops it in the comment section, um, is regarding the data that you had presented to us. So if I didn't type this note down wrong, I believe I heard there was a range of about 54,000 to over 100,000 physicians that we would be short of in the near future. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering if that data broke down the specialties that would be hit the hardest.
So that could be the case. So again, I think I pulled maybe two graphs or tables from one publication. I'd have to look back at that and see, but those data could be there. I just don't remember. Don't
Okay.
remember. But I think I don't know if you will have the slides that I shared here in the platform, but I can surely share them with you to disseminate to folks if they're interested, because there are references to each of those articles, the sources on the slides. So I would encourage you all, yeah, absolutely, anyone who's interested, go back and look at the full manuscript because there are more data you can read about, more context, the materials, the methods, more outcomes as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Bennett. We greatly appreciate your time. I don't see any more questions in the comments on any of our platforms. So I am going to take this moment to again thank you for your time and being here and supporting the SMNA nonstop.
Absolutely. I'm all in. I'm all in with SNMA. And just so folks here know, if any of you ever want to contact me on LinkedIn. Just look for me, my name. Happy to be helpful. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
For our audience, please stay tuned for additional webinars. This webinar is one of many that we will be doing out the remainder of the administrative year to support our pre-medical and MAPS members. Reminder that our annual Medical Education Conference, or AMEC, is in New Orleans this year from March 27th through the 31st, and we are excited to see you all there. For any updates, please make sure that you follow us on our Instagram page at national_SMNA_MAPS. You can also follow our main page at at official_SMNA on Instagram. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great day.